It's been a year since I moved to Portugal, and this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter is just about everything that I've got to say about the journey so far. Roll that intro. Hello, I'm Rafael de Furia, back at it again for another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week, I wanted to do a bit of a recap of some of what I've learned over this past year and some of the things that I've come across, my experiences so far, and share what I have to say after about a full rotation around the sun. So, the first thing that I will say, just to kind of get it out of the way, should you move here, shouldn't you move here? It's a great country. I don't think that everybody should move abroad. I think that some people are cut out for it, some people aren't cut out for it. It's a place that I've been constantly finding out, especially because there are so many expats here, that there are a lot of people that come without getting all of the information first and maybe don't have as much of an idea about what it is to experience life abroad and jump straight into living abroad without maybe even traveling abroad. It's an interesting place, and I would say even the type of expat that I've seen here in Portugal does differ a bit from the type of expat that I have seen in Italy. Even I would go as far as saying maybe even some different personality traits. But one thing that I've definitely noticed a lot of is, at least in regard to language, of course, the thing that I always say at the beginning of just about any episode where I have any tip about living abroad, learn the language. It doesn't matter where you're going. It doesn't matter how much English they speak. If you are going to a place where the native language is a different language, then learn that language. But in Portugal, it seems as though there are a lot of people that come with maybe a misunderstanding that everywhere speaks perfect English. You'll have like Lisbon and Porto that speak a decent level, the Algarve where it's almost the de facto single language of that region, with people living in places that don't know anything about living in Portugal. And I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but it's just the reality of some of those places and some of the villages and towns that you can find out in that part of the country or down in that part of the country. But when you do come to a smaller town or a smaller city or even a place like Braga, it is more than necessary to have the ability, if you need to call services or some sort of electric company or internet, whatever, phone, it doesn't matter. If you need to make a phone call to a Portuguese company, it is important to at least have the basics of the language, because even though there actually are a lot of companies that do offer a press 1 for English option, including the health service, although that might be press 2 for English, there are a lot of options here where you can very easily have access to certain things. However, it's not a be-all, end-all, and that in a worst case scenario, you do need to have some of the local language. And I will say that in a number of different subjects, I'm somewhat comfortable trying to get my point across in Portuguese, that I am very grateful for those times where there are services and individuals that I can speak to in English. But I know for a fact, if I didn't have as much Portuguese as I have now, it would be a very different situation with a lot more difficulties that I would have come across. And I'm not going to say that everything here was easy, but I've said, like in past episodes, that it actually seems that a lot of things here have less friction than maybe you would have in a country like Italy, where I moved from before living here in Portugal. There's a lot less bureaucracy in Portugal on a day-to-day basis than what you might experience in Italy. However, in comparison to the US, you definitely have a lot more bureaucracy than what you might normally be used to. And having been here with boots on the ground here in Portugal, it's been interesting to take a look at how things have been changing even over this past year. I believe I've mentioned this in previous episodes that I've even seen here in Braga, just in the past few months alone, prices for apartments have been skyrocketing. It has been horrific to see. And again, as somebody who does care about how things are supposed to be in a place and local cost of living and how things are for the people who are from here, I think it's very, very concerning what's been going on. But I'm not necessarily going to blame influencers online, even though you may find a lot of influencers who say, oh, you have to come and this and that. There was actually a story quite recently about some Brazilian influencers, and I believe they also were service providers of some sort that said, oh, they'll help you with all the documents to get to Portugal, to come from Brazil, because life is so grand and wonderful and you can make money. And they were posting pictures about all these like ridiculous, expensive outings that they were taking and selling a false lifestyle idea that maybe doesn't reflect what the average person or most people would end up experiencing with that same type of move being made. And so, as far as I'm aware, even the Portuguese government came down pretty hard on them, or at least has been looking for them. I won't say I know all the details about that. But again, just one of these little things in passing that it does seem on one hand that the Portuguese government does take some of these things seriously, whereas on the other hand, there are still choices being made that I might question if they are in fact the best choice when considering cost of living going up and all of these other things, and creating visas and new visas to attract more people to come to this country, rather than maybe focusing on the population already here and investing in what's here already. However, even on that point, I will say that there is another side to that coin where there is actually interest and investment and influence from the local Portuguese market. Actually, here in Braga, there's a tech startup or startup incubator or community of some sort. I'm not involved with it. So again, like, it's one of these things. I'm talking really just an overview, not this is the details of how you do and this you do. I'm not looking at articles and deep diving. This is just rough overview ideas about my experience here this year. But anyway, getting back to the point that I was talking about, that there is this startup community here. And unless I'm mistaken, the president of Portugal actually came to this big kind of talk that they were doing at one of the expo centers here in Braga. So it is a small country, and so there are a lot of things, and people have, I guess, a different level of access than they might in a larger country to maybe higher positions of the government or among the people who are maybe actually steering the ship around. So could there be the potential that maybe if the right messages get to the right people, that things could be handled in a better situation? You never know. I'm not going to say that definitely yes, it could happen. I'm not going to say definitely no, because every country has its problems and every country has programs that get put into place that are successful and not successful, and things that look like they could be really exciting from the outside. But then you look a little bit closer and it's like, hold on, wait, maybe there are other things that could actually do better. And I'm not saying that about these visas, that it is the right choice or the wrong choice, or that the local government has made the right choices or the wrong choices. It's not my place to say as a guest in this country. It's just interesting to take a look at from that same perspective. And as somebody who has come to this country to make a life for himself, I have opened up a company. That has been very interesting to learn about how you have to work it and how you have to take care of things with an accountant and this and that, and dealing with the accountant. That's been a whole other thing. There's the legal aspects, there's the financial aspects, then there's the personal aspects that all come along into it. I had my business in Italy that I closed down. Well, I'll say on that one topic, everything in Italy got closed down except for now, a full year later. My internet in Italy, I don't know if it's technically even been cut off yet. Theoretically, my contract should have ended already months ago. And actually, before I even left Italy, I sent what's in Italy called a raccomandata letter, a registered letter to the company, because that's the only way that you could actually cancel the contract. And even since being here in Portugal, I've had to organize trying to get that canceled, and have been very grateful for some help that I've gotten for some friends to help kind of facilitate that, and calling up the company, because the company kept taking money out of my account and they would not cancel the contract. And even now that the contract is technically over, as of just maybe 8 days ago or so, they have actually still taken some money out of my account. Yes, it's a much lower amount. It's €4, but they're still direct debiting from my account. So if you are going to a country like Italy and you're thinking about getting internet and going on a contract there, or really any country, be careful with the contracts. Find out how you cancel it. And even if you find out how it's canceled, it may or may not always go that way. So enough about Italy, at least for this moment, on the topic of that internet. Although I will say on the topic of internet alone, just by comparison, that my connection here has been blazing fast. Definitely multiple times over the speeds that I had in Italy. But things in Italy are now getting faster and getting better there. But still, it's been amazing to be here and have that connection. And I believe actually one of the lines that goes across the Atlantic from North America to the EU comes into Portugal. I could be wrong about that. Whatever it is, I'm very grateful for my internet speeds here. Has definitely helped with my work because I work online, taking some uploads that would have taken me 30 minutes down to maybe 30 seconds. So praise the Lord, hallelujah. I am very grateful for that boost in speed and help with my work life. But just before we get into the next topic, I wanted to say a huge thank you to those of you who support this project in the various ways that you do, whether that is by subscribing and liking and sharing these videos, or through the thanks button here on YouTube or the monthly support on Patreon. It is because of you guys that this project is able to keep on pushing forward, especially the thanks button here on YouTube, as well as Patreon and the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. But really, thank you all so much, and let's keep on moving through this episode. Another thing that I'll quickly get into, though, is that I've been talking with a lot of people who planned to move to Portugal or have moved to Portugal because of the weather, that the weather is supposed to be great here, it's supposed to be sunny, and this and that and the other, and there are parts of the country that can be like that. But then they come to the north of the country, and for the past 2-ish months, we've maybe had, including today, 5 days of sun, maybe. So, and it's not like just, a little bit of drizzle, a little bit of fog. It's like torrential, heavy rain, which has actually been a real godsend because there has been a drought. This summer, there were quite a few forest fires that were here that got not too far away from Braga. We got some of the smoke. Thankfully, it didn't reach here, but very sadly, there were very many people who were affected by those fires. So not everywhere in the country, though, is going to be this sunny paradise all the time. And even down in the Algarve, where it can be sunny maybe, 300 days of the year, it can get cold and rainy there as well. But I don't know what it is, but somehow whenever I see these things online that say, 320 days of sun and this and that, the way they count those days can be a little odd because, yeah, maybe the morning rains and the afternoon gets some sun. That's a day of sun. That's some of the counting that I've seen for some places in the world. And it's always seemed like more of a marketing thing, which is not necessarily incorrect, but not the full truth about a situation. But also, don't get me wrong, that the north of Portugal is not known to be a place that's supposed to be always super sunny year round. It does have actually a bit of a reputation for wet and cold winters. So that is something that you may want to take into consideration if you are thinking about moving to a country like Portugal, or rather specifically Portugal in this case, or what I'm talking about also could apply to Galicia in Spain, the little chunk of Spain right above Portugal, where they actually do have a language that very closely relates to Portuguese. And actually, it's one of the parent languages to Portuguese. But that is a whole different nerdy rant for a whole different video. But what about practical things like cost of living? Without getting into the specific numbers and without going into all the details, I would say for the most part, my cost of living could be called a little bit less here than it was in Italy. It's surprising to me that things are so on par in some ways. I was expecting things in Portugal to be significantly less than Italy. There are things here that, don't get me wrong, that they are actually significantly less, especially things like food can be a lot less. Rent is one of those things that can be a mixed bag. It's really going to depend on where you are in the country. But generally, day to day, like again, for food and daily necessities, those things are less. But of course, with cost of living changes that we've been seeing over the past year, as well as inflation and the situation going on with Eastern Europe affecting prices, even of electricity and so on, those things have gone up. I can't remember if I mentioned this in an episode, but even like a can of tuna that I would have bought literally a year ago for maybe 70 or 80 cents could have doubled since then in price. But for electricity, that's going to depend on where you are in the country, and it's going to depend on your independent situation. I can say, though, that my bills here, even with increases in prices, have still been less than what I paid in Italy. But there is an interesting little caveat that I've gotten so used to it, I've actually never thought to mention it in a video. But what can happen sometimes in both, I believe, Italy and Portugal, that there will be times that they estimate your cost of your utilities at the end of the month. And it's not just for electricity. Like if you have gas, that could be something that gets affected by this. But if you have a smart meter that has a direct connection to the company, like through the internet, or maybe that gets zapped once a month or something, or every other couple of months, then your bills should be very accurate. And when you sign up for your electricity, they'll tell you if it's an exact number or if it's an estimation. So if you have those smart meters and you have those exact numbers, that could end up actually really working out better for you. But I have heard of people having bills that range in price from, say, like 1 month it might be like 50 euros or 80 euros, and then the next month it's 200 euros, but their consumption is the exact same. Those are going to be things that you have to take into consideration, and you may need to actually call up the company and report yourself what the reading is on the meter. And so again, this is another time when having some Portuguese, even if you don't always need it, could end up being useful to maybe fill in the gaps. Or if you can only reach someone who doesn't speak English, that could be a situation. I'm grateful that in my apartment that actually it is a smart meter, so it reports for the proper usage that is consumed. But to get into a little bit of the fluffy stuff, I can say that I'm very grateful for this move. And even though I had been planning to stay in Italy, it's been fun to have a change. It's been fun to have a new experience and a new adventure in a country that I already loved. I haven't done as much traveling as I would have liked to. I mean, like when I first got here, it was like just ending with some of the restrictions and so on. I mean, it was still pretty open, although even in comparison to Italy, there were less restrictions seemingly here than there were there. I also haven't really had the time to do as much traveling as I would like to. And even I was planning on going to Spain, doing a video up in Spain and going to different locations. Just it hasn't happened because I haven't had the time. The only time that I've had to get really and stay outside of Braga was a few months ago when I went to Lisbon. That's why when I was there, I was like, okay, for as long as I'm there, I got to make sure that I'm able to pump out some content, because like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to like get out of Braga for another couple of days. I've been able to go to Porto, and that's a great city. Haven't been able to get out there as much as I would like, but that's another thing actually between Braga and Porto. It's wonderful to be able to have that local train for, what is it, $3.25, $3.50 plus the cost of the card, and you can reload it and reuse the same card. So we're talking about another 50 cents the first time you do it, so don't lose your card. But if you want to go, it's like every hour, half hour, there's a train that goes there. Some of the trains are a bit more expensive. It might be like 15, 13 euros, and there's another one that's like 20 something euros for the more like high-end trains. But I actually do prefer the regular commuter trains. Somehow it almost feels a little bit more spacious and open. And I'm not going to say that they're more comfortable, but on the Alpha Pendular trains, like the higher end train lines that they have here, it does this tilting thing, like pendulum. It does this thing where it tilts on some of the train line corners, the banks. I'm not a big fan of that. I get a little bit like, whoa, man, this is not for me when I'm on the train. But it is great to have that type of accessibility, because even for my work, sometimes there might be gear or something that I need that won't be available in Braga, but there will be stores in Porto that have that available. And then also meeting people here. Like I've been very blessed to meet some really awesome people, some locals, some non-locals, people from all around the world, like from different countries, and hearing about different experiences and hearing different opinions from different people, all kind of going through something similar. And how even though we may have different approaches to things, we're all having similar experiences at the end of the day, or kind of able to share information between each other. So even in my personal life, that's been very nice to have that ability to get out a little bit. Again, because of work, don't get to do it as much as I would like. But again, not even just the people who I've become friendly with, but I would say even the Portuguese on a day-to-day basis, just going to a store, going to a shop, going to a restaurant, a cafe, that I've had a lot of very, very good experiences. Again, I am someone who does try to speak Portuguese, and I can have a small conversation. It's not perfect, and I do make a lot of mistakes, but I've had a lot of very positive experiences with people here. But unfortunately, I do know that there are a lot of people who maybe don't have, and I'm not trying to make it sound like, oh, I'm the Portuguese speaker, falo bem Portuguese. No, I am just saying that I have a level of Portuguese that I know is above many other expats, that I can see that from some of their experiences based on what has happened to them, that they have had some negative experiences because of that lack of the language, or maybe confusion about certain things, or maybe inability to get certain things going on their own without help. And sometimes the help, people want like crazy amounts of money. And this gets into the expat tax that I've talked about in previous episodes. I know some of you mentioned in a recent episode that you are interested in that topic. I don't know. I should have clarified, not expat taxes, but the expat tax. People getting charged more for things. That I would like to talk more about that at some point in the future. It's a complicated topic and maybe a bit touchy, and it's not specific to Portugal, but it's important again to learn the language. So I'm going to end this episode off exactly where I started it and say a huge thank you, not only for joining me for this episode, but also just a couple days ago, I realized that the first episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter was posted to YouTube 5 years ago in, I want to say October or November. Could have even been September. So whatever, I know it's already past that time, and I actually just realized myself. So thank you for not only joining for this episode, but for the past 5 years. There have been a few of you who have stuck around for that long, and I'm so grateful to you guys for continuing, even regardless of the country, to join in for these episodes on a weekly basis, or every once in a while, whatever it may be. There are some of those screen names that I do recognize and see from time to time. So thank you all. Even if you haven't been around the full 5 years, thank you for being around for however long you've been a part of this journey. And especially, of course, a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a regular basis through Patreon and thanks button here on YouTube. They all make a massive difference in the ability for this project to be able to keep pushing forward. So thank you all so very much. I'm Rafael de Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and here's to another 5 years. See ya.